Yo, what's going on, guys? My name is David, but that's really to the people who are the closest to me. To everybody else in the world, they call me Dayvito, and I am the host of Dead Religion Podcast. And this is my family, and I want you guys to know that this almost didn't happen. God has blessed me tremendously with a beautiful family, a beautiful marriage, and a beautiful story. As I begin this testimony, I guess I should start off with who am I, really? First and foremost, I believe that I am a child of God, and I believe that God has a plan for my life, and that despite the circumstances and the craziness of my story, I can tell you now it's not pretty. I've learned to just rest in the mess. I'm a husband. I believe that God wants me to love my wife the way that Jesus loved the church. That he was willing to sacrifice himself for her and die for her. I'm a father. God has trusted me with the lives of my children, and he knew that no one else would be equipped to love them and raise them like I would. And I'm a communicator. I love connection through conversation. To me, communication is in some ways a form of intimacy. I'm a wordsmith. Words are powerful. I believe that your words create your world. And I'm a creative. I tell stories through real life experiences and on the podcasts, just based off of the things that I've gone through. But more than anything, I'm an encourager. I really believe that I can make everyone around me better by speaking and seeing in them what maybe they don't speak or even see within themselves. So my story really starts off just horrible, really. I'm a product of a one-night stand. When I was born, my last name was Cadilla. And, my mom, she felt shame and she felt guilt because of religion. And she told herself a story to really just make herself feel better about the situation. She was worried about what people were going to say. She was worried about the perception of being a single mother of two children with no father and no husband. And the truth is that she tried to abort me. She went to the abortion clinic. Wasn't really sure whether or not she was going to go through with it, but it was actually the abortion doctor that told her not to do it. And so instead of the abortion clinic taking my life, the abortion clinic in many ways saved my life. My mom met a man by the name of Edgar, and she got quickly married to him. Her reason for doing so was that she wanted to give us a family. She didn't want us to grow up without a father. But unfortunately, I suffered abuse from the hands of my father, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and even in some ways sexual abuse. Before the age of 10, I moved 3 times. I lived in Germany for a while, Colorado, and Oklahoma. But there was a lot of life lessons from the first stages of my life. I learned that I had purpose, which is why I believe that I'm a child of God. I learned how to adapt to change, obviously having to meet new people and having to make new friends and all the other places that I was going through. I learned how to make friends quickly. I'm somewhat of a social butterfly. A lot of people say that when they see me that I'm approachable, and I hope that's a good thing. I learned how to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and I learned that even though this is where I'm from, and this is the story of my origin, this is not who I am, and this is not where I'm headed. Everything that happens to you really happens for you, and I'm a product of that. Fast forward onto the second stages of my life. When I was in the 3rd grade, my uncle had passed away from AIDS. He was a heroin addict, and he contracted the disease from sharing needles. And his death affected me because my mother was very close to him, and I was very close with his kids. As a result, I needed an outlet to express myself. And because I had suffered abuse in my own home, my voice was really silenced and was never really taught to, say how I feel. I was really taught to bottle my emotions inside and just keep it pushing. And so I started to write as a way to heal. But I discovered a lot through that. I discovered that I was really good at articulating my thoughts into words. I won various awards, speeches, essays, and things like that. And I noticed that writing and speaking really came easy to me. When I was a teenager, my family and I, we moved to Florida to start a church. And I got to say, that was a big culture change for me. A lot of different influences that I wasn't used to growing up in a small town in Oklahoma. But some of those influences weren't always the best crowd, right? Some of those negative influences really led to some negative behaviors, which ultimately led to some negative outcomes. But I discovered the power of relationships throughout all of those. Some of my lifelong friends that I'm still with, over 20 years, I met when I was in Florida. I understood the power of alignments and who you align yourself with and how that can really be a trajectory for your life. And I also learned about the refuge that I needed in some of the most difficult moments of my life. When I was in the 9th grade, my dad punched me so hard in the face that I had the biggest black eye you've ever seen. My eye was completely swollen, and because I was such a social butterfly, and because people knew, the kind of person that I was, when I went back to school as a freshman in high school, trying to, tell people that I had gotten jumped and stuff, it was immediately known that that's not who I am. That's not what I represented. And so there were times in my life when I really needed to seek refuge from the reality that was taking place in my own home. And I quickly understood that sometimes your friends can really be your family of choice. And sometimes, blood isn't always thicker than water. I grew up as an ugly duckling. Some would call me the black sheep of my family. Whether it was because of the way that I was conceived and brought into this world and the circumstances that surrounded that, or whether it was because of those negative influences and the behaviors that I was putting myself through, as I was growing up and getting older. I fell in love with hip hop when I heard Jay-Z's Hard Knock Life. And for me, that really became like my identity and the type of people that I surrounded myself with and the type of culture that I really embraced, because honestly, those were the people in the culture that embraced me. In 2002, I almost died again for the second time. My dad just had a history of abusing me, from the time that I was in the 3rd grade until I was a sophomore in high school. And I made myself a promise that when he gave me that black eye, that if he ever touched me again or if he ever hit me again, that I was going to hit him back. And culturally for us, I'm Puerto Rican, that's just something you don't do. But I knew that I was going to defend myself, and I knew that I wasn't going to allow him to dictate the terms of how he was going to treat me and, the effects that it had, not just on me, but on everybody in my family. In 2002, he put his hands on me for the very last time. He took it too far, and this time I defended myself, and that was the last time he ever touched me like that. It was the last time he ever abused me like that. But as a result of that, I was really just lost and searching for meaning and searching for purpose, and I didn't really know where to go or where to turn to, so I really embraced those negative influences. And that's when my drug use and my alcohol abuse really just began to take off. It started with just smoking weed and eventually went into smoking meth. And, like many addicts, right, it just takes one time and all of a sudden you're hooked. And that's exactly what happened to me. My drug use really intensified. And on Christmas Day, 2003, I'm 17 years old, I actually overdosed on meth, and I almost died. I remember that day very specifically because I had came home and I threw up as soon as I got home. My mom, obviously concerned, was like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I lied to her and told her that I had ate some bad food. And at the time I was a really picky eater, so it was very believable. As I went into my room to try to just hide, I realized that I wasn't well, and the room started to spin, and so I started to lay down and just hoping that everything would get better. And over a period of time, my hands began to just freeze in place like this. And the more that I laid there, it's almost like I became paralyzed. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't even cry out for help. And I looked at my hands, and my hands were just turning just different shades of blue and purple. And I just knew that I was dying. And I knew that in that moment, it was almost like the only thought in my mind was, this has to be what dying feels like. And I was completely helpless. There was nothing that I could do. It was truly one of the most scariest moments of my life. But that day, God had a plan for me. And out of nowhere, my sister, I had locked my door. And back in those days, you had to use either a bobby pin or some sort of like special key to be able to unlock that door. My sister came in and she unlocked the door. She saw me laying there. She screamed for help. She called my mom. My mom sees me there lying on the floor, and she picks me up, and I was a heavy guy. I'm a man. I'm a young man at this time. She picks me up. She takes me to the car. She goes maybe 100 miles an hour to the hospital, and my dad was nowhere to be found. I don't even remember seeing my dad while all of this was transpiring. and he certainly never came to visit me in the hospital. My mom begged me as I laid in that hospital bed. I was hallucinating. I was seeing smoke. I was seeing black cats. I was just seeing a bunch of things that I knew couldn't be there because of where I was at, but that was what I was seeing. And the doctor told her, hey, this was a very close call. If he does this again, it's a good chance that he could die. But there was a nurse there that came up to my mom and told her, God's not done with him yet. He has a plan for his life, and he's going to give him one more chance. And my mom felt the voice of the Holy Spirit tell her, I'm going to give him one more chance, and I'm going to rebuild him from the ground up. So my mom went into the hospital room that day, and she, with tears in her eyes, just begged me to please go to rehab. And that's what I did. I ended up going to rehab at 18 years old, spent my 18th birthday in a rehab facility in Texas. Ultimately got better. I remember certain members of my family coming to visit me, my sisters, my siblings, my brothers. I remember them coming and writing me. Certain people in my life that, that cared for me, they wrote me, they made sure that I was okay, but I never saw my dad there. He never came to visit. My life lesson in this era of my life was don't be a public success, but a private failure. My dad was somebody who was well known and loved in the church. By all appearances, it looked like we were the ideal family, but behind closed doors, it was everything but that. Traumatic experiences and memories that I still share to this day that thankfully I've been healed from and I've been able to overcome, but they still plagued me even as an adult. Shortly after that, it was about a month away from my 21st birthday. My dad was hanging Christmas lights in the house. My mom and him finally decided to file for divorce after all the pain and trauma that he had caused all of us. And I was walking through the kitchen and I happened to see the divorce papers laying on the table. And for whatever reason, curiosity killed the cat. And I go and I start reviewing the divorce papers and reading through all this lawyer language and legalities. And I noticed that when they were dividing the assets, they were talking about the children that, were conceived during their marriage. And it had my younger brother's name, it had my other younger brother's name, and it had my baby sister. Well, everybody knew that my older sister, because of her last name, we all knew that she wasn't my dad's, but I carried his last name. And that was when I found out that my dad was not my biological father. Until this day, I don't know who my biological father is. But I was shook by that because I realized that my whole life was a lie. I grew up in church. I grew up under biblical principles. I grew up with the Bible and told as a kid not to lie to your parents. And yet here I am finding out that my parents and everyone around me was lying to me the entire time. But in a strange way, it's almost like I found closure in the abuse. Now that I knew that my dad wasn't my biological father, it answered all those questions that I had about, why would he do this to me if I was his firstborn? Why does he treat me this way? And my younger brother has his name. And so even as a kid, I would always have these questions of man, why don't I look like him? Why don't I have his eyes? Why don't I have any of his facial features? But now I knew why. Shortly after that, I again, just kind of out of control, making bad decisions. I decided, what, I'm gone. I'm out. I ended up joining the military. I joined the Army, got stationed in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, or Misery, as I like to call it. And really, it was all just due to my home situation. I was living in hell. I figured something had to be better than what I was going through at that time. And obviously, the decisions that I was making in the life that I was living, there were only two roads that was going to lead to. I was either going to be dead or I was going to be in jail. While I was in the military, I met my first wife, and I became a father for the very first time. And, as I had my oldest daughter, it really changed my meaning for life. And it does that, right? When you have children, you realize that, you're no longer living for yourself, you're actually living for someone else. And as I stared in her eyes, I knew that she was completely dependent on me. But I also recognized that I had an opportunity to change the narrative, and I had an opportunity to change what had taken place with me, and that God was essentially giving me a second chance with her. When that happened, her and I got divorced. I found that some of the things that my father was doing to my mother, I ended up doing to her. Infidelity, abuse, and that relationship didn't last long. I got divorced, and when I got divorced, I knew that I needed a fresh start. So I ended up going to Seattle for a little while, thinking that I could make things happen there. But just like Moses, my mom came to me and said, hey, I think God has a plan for your life, and I don't think it's here. I think you need to go back to where you came from where you were escaping back in Oklahoma. And I think that that's where God wants you, and that's where God's going to bless you. So reluctantly, I didn't want to do it, but decided, you know what, nothing's working out here. You know, what do I have to lose? And so I ended up going back to Oklahoma. And I think a lot of times, you know, we live our lives outside of the will of God, right? When I got divorced, I moved to Austin, experienced a lot of those defeats and, you know, closed doors, and things just wasn't working out for me there. I tried it in Seattle, and it was the exact same thing. So at that time in my life, I felt like, man, you know, I've tried it my way. Let me just listen and see if maybe, you know, this will render some different results. And so that's what I did. I decided to move back to Oklahoma. When I did, that was where I really, truly had my spiritual awakening. It was when I really decided that I was going to surrender it all, and that I would finally go all in and recommit my life to God. This happened on August 18th, 2012. A few weeks later, August 31st, literally that same year, I ended up meeting my wife now. And her and I began to embark on a journey of doing life together and, you know, trying to figure things out. She was out of a divorce. I was coming out of my divorce. And so there was a lot of hurt and a lot of pain that we still hadn't healed from, but somehow, some way, God aligned our paths together, and we've been together ever since. My other two daughters were born. One was born in Oklahoma. We shortly thereafter moved to North Carolina, where my youngest daughter was born. And we started doing life together. You know, I guess the life lesson from that era of my life would be that you can either do it God's way or you can do it your way, but I promise you that your way won't work. And then, you know, up until recently, even though things were going well, you know, with me and my wife, I had a secret. I had a secret that I had to tell. I was so sick and tired of living this double life, and I was sick and tired of like looking at myself from the lenses of like the church and thinking, man, you know, I know there's something out there for me, and I know that there's something better, but it just wasn't happening for me, and I truly wanted everything that God had for me. One Sunday at the church in North Carolina, the pastor was giving a sermon about the Peter on the boat, you know, when he cast the net on the other side and ended up getting a blessing that, you know, that took care of him. And I mean, it was an overflow, right? And I will never forget this. The pastor said, there's somebody here that wants everything that God has for them, but I'm here to tell you that it requires an act of obedience. And I knew that God was talking to me right then and there. And I knew that I was going to have to do the hardest thing that I had ever done. And that was tell my wife that I had been unfaithful and that I had been cheating on her for the entire 2 years that we had been together. Now, what the Bible says about the truth setting you free, it truly set me free. That was when I made a commitment to God, and I said, God, I don't want to know the God of my mom or the God of my dad. I don't want to know the God of my childhood. I don't want to know the God that people have taught me about. I want to know the God that you are. I want to have a personal relationship with you. I want to know who you really are and what your significance is to me, because if you don't show me now, I know that I'm never going to follow you. And even though I hated what I was doing, I couldn't stop. It cost me my job. I ended up getting fired from the job that moved us to North Carolina. But at the same time, although all of this chaos was taking place, my wife ended up forgiving me. And that's really where I began to pursue God like never before. In 2019, I moved to Texas, and still dealing with some of the inconsistencies in the story that my mom had told me, really bothered by the fact that I didn't know who my biological father was. And as I began to analyze my life and everything that I had been through, I didn't want to carry my dad's last name, the man who raised me. I didn't want to carry his last name. It meant nothing. It was so insignificant. It was riddled in failure, riddled in divorce, riddled in mistakes. And I felt like because I carried that last name, that somehow I was defined by it, and that was why all of these things were taking place for me. But as I began to process and really seek God for an answer, I made a decision that I was going to not only carry that name, but that I was going to redefine it. And that name was going to mean something different forever. That was the day I decided that everything that had taken place before me was going to stop with me. And that I would redefine and make this name mean something that it had never meant before, but that I would start a new trajectory in terms of who we are and what we do as men, husbands, and fathers. I joined a church, Elevate Life Church in Frisco, Texas in 2020. And I plugged in like really, like truly never before. It was the first time that I really saw a way of living that was really compatible and really matched what God was saying in the Bible in terms of how we were supposed to live. And while New Beginners Church in North Carolina gave me my spiritual understanding and really helped me understand God like I had never understood him before, coming to ELC gave me an opportunity to really see how to live this thing out here on earth and walking this thing out. I knew that God had to make some changes in me, and one of the desires of my heart was to always have a son. I always wanted somebody to carry my name. I really wanted to just have someone that I could father as a son and really teach him how to be a man. But before that could happen, God had to take me through all of this to transform me into the man that he needed me to be so that I could be the father that I needed to be. And the day that I decided to break the cycle and that it was going to end with me, that's when God gave me the heir to the throne. And now my name gets to live on through him, because without success, there's no succession. But I had to learn how to succeed as a man and as a person before I could ever learn how to succeed in public. And I learned that I had a crazy story, man. I mean, when you really think about everything that I've been through, most people would probably cancel me right now, or they would probably look upon me and say, oh, he's never going to amount to anything. But one thing that I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt is that God created me for greatness, like he created you for greatness. And if it was going to be, it was up to me. I'm thankful now my wife and I have been married going on 12 years this year. Our family's growing, we're healthy, and we're God-centered. We're focused on who we are becoming and not necessarily focused on the things that have happened to us in the past. And so I'm here to tell you today that if I can overcome abuse, if I can overcome pain and suffering, if I can overcome addiction, if I can overcome infidelity and sleeping with any woman that I wanted to, whenever I wanted to, and not caring about any of the ramifications that it held, I can tell you that the same is possible for you. I sit here a healed man, a forgiven man, but I never forget where I come from. And I know that greater is he that is in me than he who is in the world, and that the best is yet to come. And so if there's anything that I can say to you guys, it's to leave the past in the past, learn from the family that God gave you, and understand that everything that happens isn't meant to destroy you, it's meant to build you. And some of the most beautiful pictures of my life came from the broken glass that was shattered when it didn't appear to be the way that I wanted it to be and when my expectations weren't met. But all in all, I have a good relationship with my father now. Still don't know who my biological father is, but I also believe that eventually that will come too. That's my story. I know it isn't pretty, but I hope that it blesses you. I hope that it helps you. And just know that you were called for such a time as this, and it's never too late to do the right thing. You can always turn your life around. The name's Dayvito. Peace.